Billionaire Alexander Grant sat slumped in the plush leather of his first-class seat, his face flushed with exhaustion and embarrassment. For the last 3 hours, his 6-month-old daughter, Sophia, had screamed at the top of her lungs. Nothing, not money, not influence, not desperate pleading, could quiet her cries. Every passenger in first class had become his unwilling audience, their eyes filled with irritation, pity, or thinly veiled anger. And Alexander, one of the richest men in America, could do nothing but rock his baby helplessly while sweat beaded on his forehead. Flight attendants tried soothing suggestions, bringing bottles of warm milk, toys, even offering to walk the aisles with her. Alexander had already paced up and down the narrow airplane corridor until his arms ached. He had changed her diaper twice, tried playing soft lullabies from his phone, even held his noise-canceling headphones against her tiny ears. But nothing worked. Sophia's face was red from crying, her fists clenched, her lungs powerful enough to echo through the cabin like a siren. First-class passengers muttered complaints under their breath. One woman rolled her eyes dramatically. Another pulled her sleep mask over her face in exaggerated frustration. Even the pilot made a subtle announcement over the intercom, carefully mentioning ensuring passenger comfort, words Alexander knew were directed at him. For a man worth billions, used to solving problems with the flick of a pen or the swipe of a credit card, this was agony. No private jet, no butler, no nanny, just him, his crying child, and 200 strangers wishing they weren't trapped in the sky with him. By the way, before we continue this unbelievable story, I'd love to know, from which country are you watching right now and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments below. I always love seeing where our community is tuning in from around the world. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. Alexander leaned his head back against the seat, his eyes closing for just a second, praying for silence. But the cries only grew louder, piercing his skull like needles. He was nearing his breaking point. Other passengers had begun whispering, some shaking their heads in disapproval. For the first time in years, Alexander felt truly powerless. And then, just when he thought things couldn't possibly get worse, something unexpected stirred in the back of the plane. From the very back of the crowded economy section, where seats were tighter, meals smaller, and passengers often overlooked, a quiet figure stirred. A girl, no more than 16, perhaps 17 at most, slowly rose from her seat. Her clothes were plain and worn, a faded t-shirt tucked into jeans that had seen better days. The laces on her sneakers were mismatched, and her backpack, resting at her feet, was patched with thread in several places. Yet, despite her humble appearance, there was something steady and calm in her eyes that set her apart from the sea of restless travelers. She had been watching the scene unfold for hours. Every wail from the baby had tugged at her heart. She knew that sound, not from planes or luxury cabins, but from long nights back home where her youngest siblings had cried themselves to sleep when they were sick or hungry. She had learned out of necessity how to soothe a baby when her exhausted mother could not. She knew the rhythm, the patience, the kind of gentle presence that no amount of money could buy. The passengers near her barely noticed her at first. To them, she was just another economy traveler, invisible, insignificant. But as she began to walk slowly up the narrow aisle, her presence drew curious glances. A few people frowned, confused at what she was doing. Others assumed she was headed to the restroom or stretching her legs. Nobody could have guessed what she intended. Closer and closer she came, each step measured and deliberate. The sharp divide between economy and first class was right before her. The curtain pulled aside, the polished leather seats gleaming under soft cabin lights, champagne glasses still perched on tray tables. Some passengers in first class looked up in annoyance. What was this girl doing here, crossing into their space, disturbing their already unpleasant flight? But she kept walking, her eyes fixed on the red-faced baby squirming in Alexander Grant's arms. Her heart ached at the sight. She could feel the baby's distress as if it were her own. She paused for a moment just in front of the billionaire's seat. Alexander looked up, exhausted and defensive, expecting perhaps another complaint, another glare of disapproval. Instead, the girl's voice was soft, almost fragile, yet it carried a quiet strength. "May I?" she asked, her eyes flicking toward the wailing baby. Her words hung in the air, shocking in their simplicity. For a moment, Alexander Grant simply stared at the girl, too stunned to process her request. He blinked at her worn clothes, her youthful face, the quiet courage in her eyes. Passengers nearby tilted their heads, equally bewildered. Who was this girl? And why would she think she could succeed where a billionaire, a team of flight attendants, and hours of effort had failed? Sophia's cries continued to rattle the cabin, her tiny fists flailing against her father's chest. Alexander's arms trembled from exhaustion. He hesitated. The thought of handing his precious daughter to a complete stranger was almost unthinkable. And yet, he had no fight left in him. His instincts screamed caution, but his heart, desperate and worn down, whispered, "What if?" Without a word, Alexander loosened his grip and, with a mixture of reluctance and relief, placed Sophia into the girl's waiting arms. The moment her small body touched the girl's chest, something remarkable happened. Sophia's cries, sharp and relentless only seconds ago, began to falter. The girl shifted her gently, supporting her head with practiced hands, and began to hum. Not a song Alexander recognized, but a soft, almost ancient melody. Her voice was steady, soothing, carrying a rhythm that seemed to sink into the baby's very bones. Passengers who had been rolling their eyes moments earlier now froze in disbelief. The cabin, once filled with shrieks, grew quieter. Sophia's cries softened into whimpers, then into hiccups, and finally, astonishingly, into silence. A hush fell over the plane. 200 people, strangers in the sky, leaned in as if witnessing a miracle. A woman in the row across covered her mouth with her hand. A man who had been grumbling minutes ago sat up straight, his eyes wide. Even the flight attendants paused in the aisle, their trays forgotten. Sophia blinked up at the girl, her big watery eyes focusing for the first time since takeoff. Her tiny fists unclenched. She let out a small sigh and nuzzled against the girl's shirt, as though she had known her forever. Alexander's jaw dropped. He had tried everything: money, comfort, technology, even sheer willpower. But it was this girl, this stranger from the back of the plane, who had succeeded in seconds. It was unthinkable, and yet it had just happened. The hush inside the cabin lingered like a fragile secret. Every passenger leaned closer, afraid that even the smallest noise might break the spell the girl had cast. Alexander Grant sat motionless, his chest rising and falling as though he had just run a marathon. His daughter, who had screamed herself hoarse for hours, now lay peacefully in the arms of a stranger, a poor black girl in simple clothes, whose gentle humming filled the silence. Finally, Alexander found his voice, though it came out cracked and low. How did you do that?" he asked. The girl glanced at him, her expression calm, almost shy, as though she didn't understand the weight of what had just happened. She continued to hum for another few seconds, rocking Sophia with a natural ease before speaking softly. "I've had a lot of practice," she said. Alexander frowned. "Practice?" She nodded, shifting her gaze toward the sleeping baby. "I have 3 younger brothers and 2 sisters. I've been helping take care of them since I was little. My mama works nights, sometimes double shifts. When the babies cried, I had to figure it out. I didn't always get it right at first, but after a while I learned what works. Sometimes it's not about bottles or toys. Sometimes it's about letting them feel safe, letting them know you're here." Her words hung in the air, humble yet profound. Alexander felt a knot form in his throat. Here he was, a man who could afford the best doctors, the finest nannies, every luxury imaginable. And yet none of it had quieted his child. But this girl, with nothing more than her patience and her lived experience, had done what wealth could not. One passenger whispered, "Incredible," while another murmured, "She's a natural." Alexander leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Where are you traveling to?" he asked. The girl hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Chicago. My aunt lives there. She saved enough for my ticket so I could visit for a few weeks and help her with her kids, too." Her answer struck him harder than he expected. She wasn't traveling for vacation, nor for luxury, but out of duty, to help, to serve. to give what little she had to others who needed her. He studied her face, searching for any trace of resentment or weariness, but found none. Instead, there was a quiet strength, a resilience built not from privilege, but from hardship. He realized in that moment that this girl's wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in patience, empathy, and love, qualities his billions had not been able to buy. Sophia stirred slightly in the girl's arms, letting out a soft sigh before sinking deeper into sleep. Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. He quickly looked away, embarrassed, but the truth was undeniable. He was humbled. Deeply, utterly humbled. For the first time in years, Alexander Grant, billionaire, mogul, man who had always believed money could solve any problem, found himself learning a lesson from someone society often overlooked, and it came not in the boardroom, not in a mansion, not in the glare of cameras, but here, 30,000 feet above the earth, in the arms of a poor girl who simply knew how to love. For several long minutes, Alexander Grant said nothing. He simply watched, his billionaire's composure stripped away, as his daughter rested calmly in the arms of a girl whose name he didn't even know. The sound of silence filled the cabin, and for the first time since takeoff, it was not oppressive, but sacred. The other passengers, too, remained frozen in awe. The whispers that had once carried irritation now softened into reverent murmurs. Some looked ashamed for their earlier complaints. Others smiled, touched by what they had just witnessed. Finally, Alexander cleared his throat. His voice was hoarse, but the words carried the weight of a man unaccustomed to gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his eyes fixed on the girl. "You don't know what this means to me." The girl gave a small, modest shrug, as if she hadn't just performed a miracle in front of 200 witnesses. "It's nothing," she whispered, rocking Sophia gently. Sometimes babies just need a different touch, but to Alexander it wasn't nothing. It was everything. For years he had lived in a world where solutions were bought, not earned, where problems were delegated, not faced. Yet here, high above the clouds, a poor black girl from the back of the plane had taught him something money never could: humility. The flight attendants exchanged glances, one of them brushing away a tear. A man across the aisle shook his head in disbelief. A woman in the row behind Alexander leaned forward and said softly, "That was beautiful." Alexander swallowed hard, emotion threatening to crack the armor he had built over a lifetime. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. The girl looked up at him, her expression calm and steady. "Naomi," she said. He repeated it as though committing it to memory. "Naomi." When the plane finally began its descent, Sophia was still asleep, her tiny face peaceful against Naomi's shoulder. Alexander